Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We all showed up at the
Good
same
morning.
time. Anyway. Okay, must be our mutual key.
Dave's about to jump in, Sensei.
Pardon?
Dave's about to jump in.
Oh, in any event, we have a number of topics today, and I hope they go somewhere. And we'll see what happens. And if anyone else is going to join us late, hopefully they'll be okay. Eric, I don't have any sound for you, but that may or may not be intentional.
It's intentional.
Okay, there it is. Or it says you don't, but when you move your mouth, we get sound. Okay. Anyway, first topic is, I know we as martial artists have a tendency to collect materials on our martial art because we're trying to get background and become more educated. There are, and I think this happens with any interest we have, a person has, whether it be collecting pencil erasers or martial arts books. We tend to, we want to know more about what we're doing. I guess the question is, at what point, when you start collecting stuff, books, I've got maybe, I'm looking at my bookshelf, I've got maybe 20 to 30 books on the martial arts, okay? I know some people who have entire bookshelves. One person I met decades ago whose basement is literally filled with bookshelves with martial arts books. And I guess the question is, the books have some value to each of us in different ways. But at what point is it, are people maybe going overboard in their collection of books or knowledge about their art? Or is that even a valid question?
I don't think so, Sensei. I don't know that you can say that you get enough information, regardless of the perspective, regardless of the material that's presented to you. I don't know that you can get enough of it. Now, collect that come in a different, that could be a different question, why or what you're doing when you're collecting it, whether it's sentimental value or reference information or things that you feel like you have confidence in the validity behind it. But collecting too much information, I think, I don't know that you could ever really say that in a question.
Okay. I mean, I know I've gotten some books simply because I was interested in a specific topic and I wanted to know more. And so I've go out and buy that book. I guess my question is, at what point is a person, assuming you've got all this information, I don't loan books out anymore. I've lost a couple of really great books to people who disappeared along with the book. And they're books that, are out of print, and so you can't really get any more. But at what point are you, if you've got all this information, at what point are you a resource where, okay, you've read these books, etc., you become more knowledgeable and you can help others? At what point do you become a librarian? You know where to find stuff, although you may not know it. Or at what point do you become a hoarder where you're just collecting this stuff to say you've got it?
Yeah, I think that changes the question a little, right? It's kind of, I'm one of those people who have the hundreds and hundreds of books. And so I think the question is kind of, why do you have them? Not, I think that's kind of the question, is what are you doing with them all? Like, why do you have them? why do you have 30 books on the exact same topic? Is it because you get a sense of completion from owning it? Like, are you just collecting it? Like, I need every book that this author wrote, so I have it on a shelf because I like that. It makes me feel good. Or are you like trying to find an answer to a question? So you're looking in every book to see what people have said, to get that little answer. Um, so are you a researcher? Are you a historian? Are you digging into the philosophy of it, the technical aspects of it? There's a lot of value in books depending on what you're doing with them. But like you said, I think a lot of people buy them in the hopes that like owning them will do something. And that doesn't help you. So you end up with a shelf of things that you're going to get to one day. And that, like you were saying, that happens in any hobby. You buy a guitar and then you immediately go buy a ton of song books because you need the books to go with it. And then the books sit on a shelf and the guitar sits in a corner. And if that's what you're doing, then that's where you're just collecting things with the hope that like owning it is going to do something to you. You know what I mean? Like I spent so much money on this nice thing, it's going to make me do something. And I think that's one path people go with the book collecting. And the other is like for karate specifically, everything is verbal and orally transmitted and not to every student. So you might be being taught something in a class and you practice it and you do all this stuff, but you don't really know what's going on. Then you read a book and somebody 100 years ago mentions something that opens your mind, and now you're like, oh, that's what this is all about now. And it gives you that insight that you don't get just from training. So I think that kind of, like you're saying, what are you doing with them? If you're a
I like
researcher, you know.
I like the last thing that you said, Dean. It puts it in perspective for me. But I want to, before I address that, I want to go to the front part of it. And selfishly, I would have hope. I don't know how many books you have, but apparently it's a bunch, and I would have hoped to have as many as probably you do now. Unfortunately, I had lost all of mine the first go around through Hurricane Katrina when that impacted my area and devastated me. That was the one most significant thing that I had, including material that I had from Sensei Kirby here. That was personalized to me, and that still haunts me today. So, but then when you talk about where you were going with it, and I feel like that's the point is have I read every single page of every single book? No, I haven't. But even in these conversations that we have, through the workshops, we always come across a topic that you're like, okay, I know a little bit about it, but I want to know a little bit more about it, and what's the validity behind it, or what's the historic value behind it, or whatever the information that's related to that particular topic that you can say, okay, wait, I know where that book is. I can go grab it. I can reference it, and then put my own thoughts with it to see what makes sense to me, and then have that in general conversation. And by the way, Sensei Kirby, I'm never lending my books out again. I'm just saying, I lost them all already.
Okay, any other? Good morning, Dave.
Good morning.
You look very relaxed.
Well, somehow there was a link that I saw yesterday that just evaporated off of my computer, so I had to go to emergency measures to get here today. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate your help.
Yes, Sensei.
So, is there anything else you want to do with this topic, or?
Yes, sure. I would like to add a few points. So it's like what Dane has been saying. It's really just a matter of what do you intend to do with the information, the books. You can be as Kirby has mentioned, a librarian where you can be a resource. It did depend on your background. Like in Sensei Kirby's case, he is a sensei. He is really giving out that information. So that's becoming a resource. You have people that are hoarding all of this information, not willing to give out the information. It could be of several reasons. Number one is it could be family secrets that they don't want to give out. that's starting to change nowadays, especially in Philippine martial arts like Kali or Onis and so on. And that's starting to change nowadays. You have a lot of historical changes happening with say karate and Chinese martial arts. You have so many varieties of and styles of these arts that you have so many books, and it's kind of all over the place. And for some people that are researchers, they're trying to focus on one area and just collect everything related to those topics, so they can put together a cohesive book. I believe his name is McCarthy. He helped created the BBC for karate. It's like the encyclopedia for karate, and that's one really great example. And then you have people. I believe he goes by the name of Drysdale. He basically wrote a book on the origin of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's basically putting everything in a historical perspective. You had this modern martial art that took the world by storm, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Where did it come from? Who taught who, and what is it about? And just tracing the lineages. You have a lot of these books that do that. Now, it's just a matter of, do you want to share that resource, or are you trying to be a hoarder? Are you just collecting everything? I've actually had books when I was younger. Uh, Unfortunately, the authors are a bit of a scam artist, but they were books on ninjas, and I was learning how to turn invisible, or I would do something like this and try to see if I could make a ball of energy. That was back when I was like 10. So yeah, back then books were a huge source of information, and a way to spread that information, to educate, or in some case influence. And nowadays we have a lot of media in videos and YouTube and a bunch of other stuff other than books. So you have a lot of different sources of information nowadays.
Okay.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the ninja. I know who you're talking about. I have all of his books too. One of my favorites. And that brings up a good point too, that even, you know, bad books are pretty good sometimes too. If you read them with the right mindset, even those, you know, books that people like to dismiss at this point in time, there's some really valuable information in those books if you have an open mind. Like one of those ninja books is all about, you know, it uses the word ninja every other word, but it's just hip throws and leg sweeps and things like that. It's just like basic judo techniques, but everything is ninja, right? But in that book, that's the first time I ever saw in print that all fights end up on the ground. Like the thing that the Gracies would say and become famous for, like that silly ninja book about hip throws and stuff. That's the first time I ever saw that in print. And it's from like the early 80s, not the, you know. So it's interesting, even those books that are easily dismissed and somewhat garbage, there's still something you can get out of them if you know how, you know.
Okay.
Oh, I completely agree. If anything, there are some techniques in those books that I still remember to this day. That let's say if Sensei Kirby were to ask me to demonstrate any of those techniques, let's say with the handbow, right? And I can still remember how to do them because they make sense to me, and I understand how it works even better now. And it's still jujitsu.
Before we go on here, Dane, we got your message. Darren, excuse me, we got your message. So have a good time at the seminar.
Thank you, Sensei.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the one thing that has really changed in the past 10, 20 years is the internet and the ability to access almost any information. And also you also have with more information, you also have the problem of misinformation. And there are very few controls on that. So you still have to, as Eric said, and Darren, I believe, said, you still have to go through and decide what is legitimate in your mind and what is mythology or never. Dane's conversation with me before we were recording. Yeah, you have to. It's probably more difficult now to determine what is the actual truth, because there's so much out there. Whereas before, if it was a book, before self-published books came out, what you said had to have some sense so that the publisher would be willing to sell this book, because the publisher's goal is to make money. In case you ever write anything, that's their goal. You're secondary. I mean, that's a really cold way of looking at it, but their intent is to make money, because they want to stay in business. But I think with the advent of the internet and the self-published books, and they say that there's not, you as a reader or someone who acquires information have to become more selective, and it becomes more your responsibility to verify the truth of whatever you're seeing. Even videos of jujitsu techniques. If you get two people who are great actors and great gymnasts, they can demonstrate phenomenal techniques that have not the smallest chance in hell of working in a street situation. And I've seen videos like that. And so you really have to, the responsibility for what is actual truth or fact, because truth is relative. What's actual fact, there's a greater responsibility on you as the individual to determine that. And I don't know whether that's fair or not, but that's where it is. Dave, where are you?
I am here.
I know you're there, but what's in the background there?
Oh, well, we had to resort to taking this room and using it to store some bedding for our daughter until such time as she moves to a more permanent setting. Okay. So that's a temporary setup back there.
If you look at it quick, it kind of looks like you're laying in a bed.
Yeah, it looks like you're lying down.
Oh boy, I set myself up big time this morning, didn't I? Lose the link late here, and now it looks like I'm in bed. You guys won't believe this, but I got up at 5:30 this morning and did a full premium workout. I got endorphins coursing through my veins. I got triple shot espresso. I am flying high. It's lovely. I'm happy to be here. Sorry I'm late.
Ceiling cameras? Okay, anyway.
I'm trying to figure out the topic you guys are talking about. It sounds to me like you guys have read some pretty unscrupulous material, and you're a little bit ticked off about it.
I've run into very little unscrupulous material, except for perhaps the person that Dane and I were talking about before we started recording. It's I don't think much of it is unscrupulous. I think it's you have to determine as the reader or the viewer, if it's a video, whether it is accurate.
Gotcha. The veracity of the material.
Yeah, the veracity. You can't just get something and say, oh, this is, for lack of a better phrase, you can't just say, oh, this is God's word, I accept it. The world is not that simple anymore.
You know, to that point, sometimes it's useful to read a lot of people being wrong about something too. Like sometimes every book says something different, and when you read it, you immediately say, that's absolutely not true, that's garbage. But you hear like 50 completely garbage, weird opinions, and then you start understanding that everyone is just telling you something they made up about this, and no one has the answer. And you start understanding that they're all wrong. Each style has their own, whatever it is,
Right.
you also can kind of start synthesizing the truth by seeing all of the wrong answers constantly too.
Yeah, you can either move into the truth backwards by eliminating all the falsehoods, or sometimes if you have a whole bunch of information from different sources, you may be able to pick out particles of truth, and that may then build into something that has some substance. So it's all a matter of how deep you're willing to dig to find out information. I as a I taught history or government. I did as much as I could to get my kids into primary source materials, and then let them determine from what they've read, about that period, or people who wrote in that time, and even now, what is quote unquote the truth. And so I was not as concerned that my kids remembered factual information as how to find factual information. And I never understood how, even in high school, there were some history teachers that required the kids know the 50 states. And I'd say, why? They can just look at a map. If they know which map to look at, why do they have to know the 50 states? It comes down maybe to what you're looking for with a resource. And so anyway, anything else you want to deal with this topic on martial artists as information collectors? Do you ever get asked?
Maybe
I was going to say, do you ever get asked, do you know secret techniques? How many of you know secret techniques?
Depends on who's asking me, right?
Right.
It could be a secret to them.
Right.
True story, Dean.
As long as it's a secret, as long as they don't know about it, you're safe. Okay. Okay, let's move on here.
I was just going to say one just to give a counter argument here for the whole thing. I think it kind of ties into, it might be another question on the list too. Like if somebody's training in another art, how do you keep that out of your dojo? Right? Somebody comes in, they're constantly like, well, when I took Krav Maga, we did it like this, and when I did this, we do that. That's the only negative I would say, is like books in the wrong hands lend themselves towards that attitude, where now you come into a class and you're like, well, I was reading that you should put your foot here, and I was reading that you grab them by the hip. Why are you doing it like that?
I'm having a conversation with a couple of I have a student who's coming into my parks class was in judo decades ago, and I have one that's currently in judo online, and we're having some interesting discussions in that for example, judo is very specific. You have specific names for each specific throw. in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, it's more, well, that's a hip throw. I know I'm really simplifying things. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
You know, yeah, it can be a Rojo Seonagi, Ippon Seonagi, it can be Harigoshi, it can be Hamigoshi, it can be a whole series of, and even within those, there are specific names for specific variations. But in Jiu-Jitsu, you can say, oh, that was a, you know, Ippon Seonagi, or you can say it's Koshinagi. And maybe it's a, you know, Jiu-Jitsu is not as specialized. I mean, it is, you know, and maybe the problem is because the parent art, I don't know, but you know, there, you know, I am having conversations because they'll say, well, I think it was on discussion on, and Eric is probably going to pick up on this because it involves someone he knows. There's Ude Gruma Makikomi and Koshi. They're two kind. Apparently, they're in Jiu-Jitsu. There's Karate Makikomi, which is body winding throw, and in Judo, I think that with the Karate Makikomi in Jiu-Jitsu, the block is at the ankle, and you keep your entire leg, arm, body up to your head straight. In Judo, I think what they do with the Karate Makikomi, they load them up on the hip partially and then do the throw. And that causes some confusion because now you've got the same technique name that is set up in two different ways, but the end result is the same. You know, so who's right?
I think I understand where you're coming from. Like you're doing the difference between the Kushinaga and the Touchy, but it's not necessarily the blocking the ankle, but you're dropping the you're doing a body drop of some type. But blocking the ankle does help. Versus like that's the idea is, where is the focal point? So in the case of an Atoshi, I'm blocking the ankle.
Right.
In the case of a Kushinaga, it's a hip throw. The hip
Correct.
is the focal point.
Right.
If I like same thing for Ippon Seonagi, Mote Seonagi, like if I'm doing the technique, I'm loading them onto my back. I'm using my hip as the focal point. It's considered a hip throw.
Right.
So that's kind of how we view it in Judo. We also have Ashiwaza. We have the various foot sweeps and trips. So like we have the different categories of techniques. And in Judo, yes, it is very specific. I can have say Tomonagi. Now I have Yogo Tomonagi, and so like I'm doing a stomach throw sideways, or a some kind of spinning Tomonagi. You have a lot of these variations, but in Judo, the names are very specific, whereas in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, the names are very general.
Right. Okay. Okay, let's move on here. I don't know where this topic came from. Copyright laws, and I want to preface this segment is nothing that we are saying here is legal advice. Because anyone who's watching this video, I don't want you to think that if we say something that you take it as legal advice. If you're going to do some copywriting, you need to check with the U.S. Office of Copyrights or copyright attorney or whatever to, you know, for accurate information. Okay. because I know as martial artists, we tend to excerpt information from books at times. And I'm putting that very tactfully. And sometimes it becomes a question of excerpting it and not giving credit, which people don't like, particularly authors and publishers. Sometimes it's a matter of excerpting too much, which authors and publishers don't like, particularly if credit is not given. On the other hand, sometimes I won't say authors, but sometimes publishers are so protective of their work that if you mention the name of that book, they want to receive a stipend or a portion of the sales for each book. What other things are there? Saying something is copyrighted and it isn't, because you can go online and check to see if anything's copyrighted that someone writes, if they claim it's copyrighted. And I'll tell you from personal experience, copywriting stuff is not that difficult. It's it's relatively if you can follow the directions, it's relatively simple and it's relatively inexpensive. But it does give you some protections. And from what I know at this point, that if you copyright something, the copyright remains valid up to 70 years after you're passing off to the great tatami in the sky, or the torn up tatami down below. Anyway, so it does, again, from my knowledge as a teacher, you can, if you are within a public school setting or something like that, you can excerpt certain portions as educational excerpts, as long as you give credit, and giving credit is the key. And I don't know where else we want to go with this.
Yeah, I think most situations they'll allow you to use a line or two, sentence or two, as long as you have reference and give proper association to the author.
Right. Yeah. Most people, I've had people ask me, and I refer them to Century Martial Arts now if they want to, excerpt something because they own the copyrights, and they usually have no problem with it. I've known only one incident, I think, for my first or second book, someone decided to reproduce several pages of my book, one of my books, into their books, and someone lost a lot of money in that process. And their publisher wasn't happy either. But yeah, as long as you give credit, I think that's the key. And I think one of the things we as martial artists maybe also have a responsibility is that if we get an idea from someone else, or if Dave comes up with a good idea for how to teach something, and Dave publishes a lot of stuff too. He has some really good material. He'll sell you his books for only $2,673 minus 10% if you're a black belt. No, I'm only kidding.
No discount.
He has, Dave. I found that good instructors will take material and reorganize it into a presentation that works for them, which then works better for their students. And so some of their students figure out a better way of doing it, because that's the nature of things. And so you can contact Dave and see what, He has, because he uses some the material is the same, but the approach, the presentation is somewhat different, and I don't worry about that because that's the way, I say that's the way things are, and that's the way people, things have to work in your mind before you can give them out to someone else. And Dave's just found a way of presenting the material differently, and it's very logical, and it works. So I think George Kushinaga has done the same thing up in Canada. I think Tony did something like that years ago. Okay, I think as we move up in ranks, at some point we say, I need to write this down so that my followers can have something to work from in terms of a reference. And it keeps getting changed. And sometimes it's, I don't get upset with it because for me, it's interesting to find out what my students have done with what they've done with my material, or how they've rearranged it, or things of that sort. Because, there's more than one way to bake a cake, for lack of a better phrase. And anyway, nothing else.
Did Seki get to see your book, Sensei? Was Seki still around when you published the first book?
The first one he saw. He may have seen the second one. He was really excited about that because he really,
With good reason.
I think that moved me up a few notches in his viewpoint. But yeah, that's
the first time most people heard of jujitsu. Everybody knew judo and karate. That was
he was impressed. He says, "My name is in here."
I love it.
It is, how do you say it? It is. I mean, I've seen a few books now where my name has appeared, and that really impresses me. It makes me feel good that someone has felt that I'm that significant, or what I have to offer is that significant, that they mention my name. And it's just, it's nice. It's one of those, you can't, it's like having all your students thank you at the end of the year for you doing a good job. And they give you a little plaque or something like that. And the plaque itself is not that important, but what it symbolizes, and now we're going back to the discussion we had, Dane, before we recorded anything, it symbolizes how they valued you. And that's important to all of us as instructors, because that's I think what we want to be remembered for, is what we've given. And I know most martial artists give a lot. And
it's in the giving that you do the taking.
Pardon?
It's in the giving that you do the taking.
I'm sorry.
It is in the giving that you do the taking. What happens is the order happens that you give and give and give and give, and then you find gradually that you're receiving.
Yeah.
I
think that's a good analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
I can also tell you, Sensei, that just something worth sharing. First of all, I think back. I don't have the book sitting in front of me right now, but I know that I have attributed and used your name many times in my books because you have inspired me personally and inspired a great many people I know. And it's always fun to say, these writings are based on the extensive career of George Kirby and what he's provided to me along the way. I will tell you that I've written 6 books, and each one of them was not planned. Each one took 2 years to write. I always thought they'd take me 3 months. They took 2 years. And the only reason any of them ever got written was because I went to find the book and it wasn't available. And then I said, darn, now I have to write it. Okay. So that was how they were birthed. 2 are on piano instruction, 4 are on self-defense. I will just say one thing, the pianos books have been written for profit. The self-defense books have not been written for profit. So they've been sold by me for the cost of paper and ink and postage. And I've also provided to my students that same way. I don't have any problem with for-profit dojos and for-profit sale of books. It's just that for me personally, that's what works. I will then tell you one other thing. If anybody here wants my 6th book, it's online. It's free. I put it online so that my students would have it to use anytime they want to on their phone or their computer. And I can tell you that if you go to kataguide.yolasite.com, you can find our dojo website, and that 6th book in its entirety is there, start to finish. So there you go. Free book. Don't even need to worry about ordering anything. And it's just KATAGUIDE.YOLASITE.com. kataguide.yolasite.com. And that'll bring up our dojo website, and you can go exploring around there. And one of the things you'll find is that book, among other things, charts and so forth. You'll also see Sensei Kirby's name mentioned quite often.
Okay, but I think it behooves us sometimes, if we come up with an idea we don't think it's, we don't think it's worth writing down. And my attitude is, if you come up with something that you think has some value, you need to write it down and explore it, because at the very least, you will learn from the experience, and that will make you a better person and a better sensei.
Amen.
And if then you can, a student or someone asks you about it, you say, "Oh, I've got this," they'll say, "Well, can I read it?" Which is probably more desirable. I'm not trying to insult anyone. Is probably more desirable than having them say, "Oh, will you tell me all about it?" Because can I read it leaves them in control as to where and when they're going to read it, and what they're going to think about it. If they have to listen to you or me, sometimes the explanation just gets too long or beyond their ability to figure it out, or all these other things. And by having it in writing, they can go at their own speed. And eventually, once they're done, they'll say, "Damn, Tony's smart. I got to listen to him and go to see what he's up to." You have to, the only thing I would suggest, and this is in terms of writing something, is when you write, when you're done, put it down, come back to it in a few days or a week or 2 weeks, and you're going to find not only a ton of mistakes, but you're going to find things, I need to explain that, or this doesn't make sense. And you have to be your own best critic, so to speak. And then when you get done with that, have someone else read it. And if they have any questions, you just have to put a question mark by anything that they don't understand. And then you have to explain that. Eventually you get something that tells a complete story. And then maybe your 5-page essay becomes a 200-page book. You don't know, but our minds are fantastic things. And if we allow them to do their job, it's amazing what we can find out, not only about ourselves as a person, but what we know. And to me, that's as a teacher, that was a very frustrating part. The kids initially didn't have the confidence to really express what they thought and their reasons. And that was probably my main goal in any class, regardless of subject, was to get them to the point where they believed in themselves. and I'm sure you know this, because once you believe in yourself and your capabilities, when you started in jujitsu, you were saying, no way does this stuff work. Maybe I might make it to 6Q. Or maybe I might make it to purple. I'll never be a sensei. And you've set up all these, or I myself included, we set up all these roadblocks to our own progress. But if we're persistent, we knock down those roadblocks.
There's a saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Henry Ford.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And that it's so true. It's all, if you think you're going to fail, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it doesn't always work that way. You could think you're going to succeed and still fail, but you get the point.
When I taught junior high, we had a counselor, and I would occasionally work in the counseling office because, anyway, and the kids referred to her as mom. She was a kind of an elderly Irish lady, red hair, blue eyes. You did not mess with her, but the kids referred to her as mom. And I mean, she's and I was working on, I asked a kid, why did you do this? And she overheard me. She says, you don't ask people why, because it's an automatic inference that they're wrong. You ask, what were your reasons? And then you find out what really happened. And that's why, you know, if people question what you've written down, you don't say, why do you think this way? You say, what are your reasons for thinking this way? Because this then gives you tools to improve whatever you've written. Because what is more, I say it's more objective than why. You know, if you say, why did you do that? You're never going to come up with rarely come up with a correct answer that can be worked with. This is a counseling.
I felt like it.
If it's,
yeah, I felt like it, right?
You know, go back to remembering when you were a kid and your parent, moms or dad said, why did you do that? You know right away you're in deep doo-doo. You know, there's no valid excuse that's going to work. But if they ask, what were your reasons? Sometimes you have a legitimate reason, and then you're no longer in trouble, or not as much trouble. So anyhow, okay, where are we here?
One quick note on books and writing that just popped in my head here. Music and martial arts and probably other arts are kind of unique, where, I guess not totally unique, but in these writings, I think are really important too, because they change as you change.
Yes.
The first time you read a book as a white belt and you've never done anything, you read this book, you get a certain thing from it. 20 years later, you come back and read that book, it means something entirely different. You know, both just, even if it's just a book about technique, even if it's like, think about like a piano, like the first time you're sitting down to play the piano and they say like, play every other key, every other white key on the piano. You're just struggling to make sure your fingers can do it, and you're not thinking, and you're doing that. And then 10 years later, you sit down and read it and you're like, oh, they're showing me to play whatever major thirds. You know, you start understanding why they were going with that. Oh, they're showing me how to eventually build a chord here. I get what they're, but when you're beginning, it's just, why am I doing these? All right, I'll do it. You know, and I think that's a unique thing with this kind of stuff, where like you read it, it means something, you train and train and train, like your training informs the reading and the reading informs the training. You know, I think they go back and forth like that in a kind of unique way in the arts, you know.
Okay. The next topic, and I don't know whether Dane and I touched on this before we started recording, or whether it's early in the recording also. How do you deal with students who are also learning a different martial art elsewhere, and inadvertently revert to those techniques in your dojo? How do you deal with that? I mean, I have some answers, but
I know what a very wise man told me one day. He said, Tony, put what you know of karate on the back burner and open yourself up to the jujitsu. And that's what I did.
Okay, any other?
When I have students who want to introduce new information or new ways, I'll generally get with them and talk about including it in a future class so that we can stay on topic, and then get with them in between class and say, how do we want to present this? Do you have ideas? Let's find a way to include them if we can.
Okay. So, go
When-
ahead.
whenever Sensei Kirby has asked me to teach a technique or a portion of class, I do, because I do have a background in a variety of other martial arts, so they are in a way incorporated into my jiu-jitsu practice. So I am, whenever I present any of these teachings or techniques, I tend to introduce them somewhat. It's whatever can make the technique or the entries into the techniques easier, and I can get that information across. But I'm because we are teaching jiu-jitsu, I'm keeping it as jiu-jitsu, as in the core of the technique is jiu-jitsu. It's just another way to get into it. So that's kind of one way that I am looking at it. But still, if we are in a jiu-jitsu class, keep it as a jiu-jitsu technique. If you're in a karate class, keep it as a karate type technique and movements.
I'm confused because I operate from the position that it's all jujitsu. Seriously, I'm serious. So a lot of times what they're going to tell me is Krav Maga or Hapkido or whatever. It's all jujitsu. So a lot of times what they are coming up with is a variation or just some other tangentially related idea.
Okay. Both sensei that I had, Seki and Hal Brocious, and Seki was jiu-jitsu and Hal Brocious was Katsugo jiu-jitsu. And for those of you that are old enough to remember Buddy Hackett, anyone remember Buddy Hackett? Okay. Hal Brocious was an absolute double of Buddy Hackett. Right? Same warped sense of humor.
Oh my goodness.
But they both had the same philosophy, which is whatever you have learned elsewhere stops at the dojo door. And they were both very adamant about it. And I was very upfront with both Seki and Hal. I said, I'm doing this. They said, fine, I can't prevent you doing, but don't bring it into the dojo. I've had a couple of black belts who have learned other styles of jiu-jitsu, other martial arts, and you cannot prevent a student from learning something else. But where it crossed, and a couple of them had crossed the line, was where they started proselytizing that particular rule in my class, saying this is the way you should be doing it. This is hunky-dory jiu-jitsu, and this is the way the hunky-dory sensei say you should be doing it, and that's where I draw the line. I think, as Dave said, whatever else comes in, it is jiu-jitsu, but it's how they present that information to the class, or even in practice. If they do a technique, so differently, or they say this is the way it's supposed to be done, the student's not familiar, there's a higher risk of injury, because you're trying to teach students how to do techniques in a certain way, hopefully with their own safety in mind. And if they're expecting something to go one way, then all of a sudden it goes this way, because this particular style does it completely different, you're running into some safety issues. So that, so that's another factor. And I've had to, I would talk with the black belt first and say, this is the problem, yada, yada, yada. And I've actually, in both cases, actually have to write them a letter and say, this is before internet, and say, you need to make a choice. Okay, if you're going to come into my class, what you're doing in such and such class has to stop at the dojo door, because it's in I'm trying to teach a certain style of jujitsu or whatnot. And unfortunately, I've lost both black belts, and they were good black belts, but sometimes people get very headstrong. And at some point you as a sensei have to say, you can't do this in my class. And that's a hard thing to say to a student, particularly if they've been with you for several years.
Yeah, in my case, I think it was a situation where I was coming in as a black belt in karate already, and maybe a little excited, a little headstrong, but I took it as good advice, and I loved my training.
Yeah, I mean, in my book, if you're trying to learn another martial art, you have to leave whatever, so that you can, I can't even think of the correct phrase. If you want to get into the art properly, I know that's not the correct way of saying it, you have to leave whatever else you've learned at the door. You have to, as Dave, I think Dave said, or maybe Torn, you have to enter the dojo with an open mind, so that you can.
Another way to look at it is, if you're going into a new martial art, go like you're a brand new white belt.
Yeah. Yeah, but you have to go with an open mind, an empty mind. Well, no one's mind is really empty, but it's here's my coffee cup. I need a fresh cup of coffee, if you can't think of any other analogy, or I need a stiff drink.
Yeah, there's some saying about that, right? Like you can't fill a full cup or whatever. You can't pour anything in a full cup. Yeah, you have to ask yourself, it's, we're looking at it from like the sensei perspective, how do you deal with that? But also, like, as a student, you need to get that out of you also. Like, you're not a student if you come in and you're asking somebody to teach you something and then you say, oh, that's great, I do it like this. Like, why did you ask? Why are you here? You're never going to learn if you already know. Oh, we're doing hip throws, oh, here's how I do it. Then why are you here asking me how to do a hip throw? You have to do it to yourself too. You have to, like Eric was saying, you have to, when you're a white belt, be a white belt.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a white belt, if you're acting like one, act like one, right? Don't make believe you know.
It's kind of like I ask my students, of course, only a couple of the upper belts have gi bags. The rest come in their gis or whatnot. They haven't figured out life yet. And I'll even ask them, I said, how many of you that have gi bags, how many of you have a white belt in that bag? And they still look at me like, huh? And Eric, why is that white belt in your bag?
Well, I have a couple of reasons. I have a couple of white belts in there. One is a flimsy, feels like paper kind of white belt. I use those for just general stuff. If I want to work out and I need a rope, or if I can use it as a rope technique, it's the one I don't mind getting dirty or damaged. I do have another thicker white belt that I use if, let's say, if I'm visiting at another dojo. I'm not going in as a black belt. I'm not their black belt. But it's also, I would ask the sensei, do you want me to come in as a black belt because it is jujitsu, or do you want me to come in as a white belt? White belt? Okay, I have a white belt. Tie it on. That's in the class. I'm not there to teach. That it's not. This is not my class. It's not my class to teach. It's I'm learning something new, or attempting to learn something new. So it is. So as Dane, I think it was Dane that was saying, and Kirby as well. It's like, if someone is asking you to how you do this technique, and then they say, "Oh, well, I do this." How I tend to look at it is, how do you do this technique? I do this technique this way. Now I have two ways to do this technique. So I'm looking at different ways to do one thing. So a good example is you have Harai Goshi. There's a few ways to do that technique, and basically my training partner Christopher, he and I have both came up with another really good way to do a Harai Goshi, and it works beautifully. I performed that technique against somebody else in class, and it just works. So I am looking at if I go to another class, I am looking at different ways to do something, like another way to do a haraigoshi. So that's kind of how I tend to look at it. That's not also another reason why I always have a white belt in my gym bag.
Okay.
And I think that points out too, there's the two kinds of people who do this thing that we're talking about. Like, there's two kinds of people who have a background and then go to a new dojo. One is this person like we were talking about, who's a white belt and goes in and wants to learn. Like, you already know things. Like, I probably have like 5 different kotegaeshis at this point, and they're all the same thing. And if you asked me before, I would say, yeah, I know how to do kotegaeshi, but then I came out with like a 6th one, where like now you use your whole hand instead of your thumb or whatever. And you know, now I have 6 of them instead of telling 5 people that I already knew kotegaeshi, right? I learned 6 of them. And you're either there to learn, okay, how does Aiki Jujitsu do it? How does Aikido do it? How does Jujitsu do it? How does karate do it? That's interesting. Or you're the person who's like, I know that stuff. Let me go to that dojo and like show them what I know, and you know, challenge that sensei and have him show me something and be like, really, that's how you do it? Because I would do it like this. You know, there's that, like, it's like you're either going there to genuinely learn from a breadth of experience, or you're kind of doing like a dojo challenge. You know, when you're pushing back on a teacher like that, you could be comparing techniques. Like, if we're informally doing something and you put me in a kotegaeshi and I'm like, oh, that's really cool, look how I do it, you know, we're exchanging something. That's a little different. But if the teacher's like, we do it like this, and you're like, really? Because I was taught, you know, not, you're just there to be difficult. You know, you're doing a challenge, you're testing something, you're not learning something. It's not the right attitude.
Okay. Before we leave this topic, maybe you can work around. I know I've mentioned what I've done, but if you have a student who is insistent on doing things a different way, or saying this way is better, you know, what have you, what are the ultimate steps you would take with this student? And recognizing that the ultimate step is you have to decide whether you want to stay in this class or not, because that's, regardless of how you say it, that's what you're saying. So what I'm looking for is, what are different ways you might when push comes to shove, how would you deal with a student who is really being, for lack of a better phrase, recalcitrant or pushy or proselytizing or that sort of thing?
I think that goes back to what you said earlier. Safety is the greatest concern, and your student safety is your responsibility. So if you can't do what I'm asking you to do, there's the door.
Any other alternatives? Have any of you ever had to do that to a student?
Yes.
I mean, I have. You really don't like to do that.
No.
It's like throwing one of your kids out of the house. Okay.
Sensei, what about randori? What about randori in this sense? Like if like Eric was saying, like he kind of honed a variation of something on his own that he can use. Is that appropriate? Like how bound are you in a sparring or a free form in a randori or something? How accepting of those variations and things are bringing in outside techniques there, where it's not just like the actual class, but like a free.
I would probably, and I can't give you a simple answer. I would probably make that dependent upon the rank of the two people that are involved in randori. If they're brown or black belt, I might give them more leeway than if it was two purple belts or two green belts, because they simply, regardless, they simply don't have the mat experience to deal with an unknown situation. And as Tony said, it comes down to safety.
That's kind of how I view it, because if I'm training with someone that I am not familiar with, I would keep it within that realm. But my training partner Christopher and I, we both experienced so many different martial arts that we are, between me and him, we are in agreement that we can do this or we can do that, or we can be like, I don't feel like doing this right now. Okay, whatever. A lot of it, the higher levels that we have, the higher level rank means more experience, more knowledge. It really should be left to our discretion. There's a certain point where it's just, okay, that now it's going too much. Like it's going too much out of the realm of, say, jujitsu or karate. But it's that's when it's just, okay, just stop. Let's go back the other way. And it's up to the discretion of the two higher rank belts to, if they want to do this or not. So you kind of have that kind of leeway, as Sensei Kirby was saying. Otherwise, try to keep it as strictly that section for safety reasons, because the lower rank belts may not know exactly how to deal with an unfamiliar situation, as some of you have mentioned.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, and I've got an editorial, I think in the July or maybe the August issue of Kokoro on the need for a good uke. I mean, to me, a good uke is he's familiar enough with it. He knows what the techniques feel like. He can essentially, he can protect himself from injury because he can sense what you're trying to do, and He goes with you and cooperates with you 100%. And it's not to make you look good. He's cooperating with you 100% to make him be safe. I mean, I've seen Tori screw up on technique, execution, and Uke still goes through the motions just because they know that's what they're supposed to do so they don't get hurt. And like I said, I think a lot of it comes down to experience. If I have, okay, I'm a 10th. I won't do randori with anyone. I've had enough body parts replaced and doctors saying you can't do this and that. I mean, I have a student who's got a couple of metal, what do you call them, shafts in his backbone, and he's still taking falls within certain limits, even though his doctor has said, "Oh no." But he's come up with some workarounds and he's functioning with it. And I have some workarounds, but they're things I will not do anymore, as much as I regret. And I really regret not being able to do them, because I'd like to be able to have a student say to us, okay, do this technique on me, even a simple hand throw. I'm not supposed to land on my right side. You want to do the technique left-handed? Cool. But it's frustrating to me because I can't help this student as much as I would like to. But then again, I'm concerned about my safety, because if I get racked up, then it affects more people. And that's one of the problems that you have as an uke in any martial art, is that, how much safety is should be your number one protocol, your own personal safety. And we all do stupid things in life, but, you don't want to get yourself injured. Okay, how did we get off onto this tangent? Okay, let's do one more topic here. Do we want to deal with participant release agreements? Dave and I could go back and forth on this today, because we've been exchanging them, and his participant agreement might not fly in California, and my participant agreement looks like 3,000 attorneys have gotten their hands on it. And as I told Dave, I said, I have seen participant release agreements that are even more, I say, pain in the butt than the one we use.
3 pages long.
3 pages long, and you've got to sign. You've got to initial every sentence, and you have to sign at the end of every paragraph. And then
initial your signature.
They give you a little lab tube, so you can leave a DNA sample. So I don't think we're going to deal with the content of a release, because those vary by state, et cetera, et cetera. Would you allow anyone on your mat without signing a participant release?
No.
Absolutely no. If anything, I'm just reading through the question. Anyone on your mat without signing it? Absolutely not. Then you have something with anyone on your mat who won't sign for religious reason. Still, no, you're not getting on the mat without signing a participation form. Basically, anyone who crosses out portions of the agreement, you're just modifying the agreement to your liking. No, I will not accept that. Now, as Kirby had mentioned, every state is different. Ideally, you want to have a lawyer or attorney draft up legal documents for your dojo that is specific for your city, your county, your state. This way, you can cover your assets as much as possible.
Yeah. And you know, as I've said, back in the 60s, participant releases were really pretty lame compared to today, at least in California. And if you injured yourself in a martial arts class, a judge would basically say, well, tough, you were stupid to get in the martial arts class in the first place. And that's as far as it went. And today it's a different story. But yeah, if for religious reasons, that's a weird one, because and I've run across that. And usually at that point, I will say, well, the answer is obviously no. They have to. If you don't sign the agreement, you don't get on the mat. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I can't make exceptions for that for legal reasons.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Can you clarify that? That religious reason?
Yeah, there are a couple of religions, and I don't want to mention them specifically, that consider something like that to be some sort of subservience. And you have to, your only response is to say, this is not, there's nothing in here that puts you subservient to anyone else, or there's no philosophy in here that you got to cover all these bases. For example, when I taught school, that we had a large number of students that were that particular religion, and the principal asked me up front, what are you going to do about you have this bow in and bow out, and doesn't that indicate subservience? And I said, if you want to, it can. I said, but as far as my sensei was concerned, the way I've learned, it's that bow is an indication of courtesy and respect, like a handshake. And that's as far as it goes. It's not subservience. And that explanation worked with the kids. And there were even some parents that would call me up, say, I'd say, this is what it stands. This is all it is. I said, there's no subservience. Your son is just as equal as I am. There's no, we aren't going to pledge allegiance to the flag at the beginning of class. There's no Japanese or Korean flag in one corner and little water fountain in the other corner that we're going to bow to. And that's all it means. And that usually works. So that's the religious context, because they may fear they're indicating subservience to you, or subservience. That's the key word, is that they are not being, nothing in there indicates subservience.
So it's more about the ritual, if you will, or something, the bowing and the kneeling and those kinds of aspects that the problem was. Not with like they can't sign a contract itself.
Right. Because it indicates you're going to expect them to be subservient to you, the sensei.
Got it.
And that's
I know I think there's also some I don't know if there's some religions, but I think there are some people in religions that also will not sign like any kind of a contract or an oath or anything, because you can't swear an oath or have any allegiance to anything that's blah blah blah. Yeah,
right. And the subservience will work for that too. It's just
got it.
It's all you're saying by signing this is that you understand this and you agree to it. You're not being you're not being subservient to anyone or anything.
Right.
Because that's, otherwise you run into problems. And
I think that term master too makes people a little confused. You are one who's mastered something, like you are a master, right? You're not necessarily someone's master. Like, this is my master. More, this is the master that I study, right? It's not, I think they get hung up on that too. Like, this guy's my master.
There are people, I don't like to use the word master because of the inference that you are over someone. And you're over someone in where you basically control their life and what have you, and they have to, again, it's subservience.
Right.
And that's
Yeah, that much I do agree with. I mean, back in the old days, yes, we had that. You had karate master, you had kung fu master, and that we used to refer to the teacher as master. Nowadays, I do kind of agree. It's the context of today's world is it feels weird calling someone a master. You ain't the master of me. No, you're my teacher. You're my sensei, shihon, coach, instructor. Those are all very valid terms that I would much rather use nowadays over master or grandmaster, especially with all the various martial arts. Yeah, the grandmaster is
all high poobah.
Yeah.
It's just the other phrases for basically someone who teaches, because that's what you do. I prefer that. I prefer, and I wouldn't mind being called a coach, because I'm coaching someone on how to do martial arts techniques, or I am an instructor, because that's what I'm doing. I am instructing. I am teaching. So
Yeah, I think one of the unique things that came out of the bow thing was that my students would also, when they came into the classroom for the jujitsu, they'd stop and bow at the door. Again, it was an indication of respect for the dojo and courtesy, and and what happened was it started affecting other classes on the campus, because kids like to run in and out of doors. And this just, for a lot of classes, it just stopped it, because the students would go into other classes and they'd stop and bow before they entered the other teachers' classrooms. And when they left the classroom, they'd turn in the doorway and stop and bow inward. And then they go out, and the teachers say, where is this coming from? And it's a good idea, but how, so, what you do affects how people behave. And then I had one kid who finally said to me one day, he says, is that why some Japanese and Chinese restaurants have they call it a towel or cloth hanging down on the doorway, so that you have to bow your head when you come in, so you don't
yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. When you go to a sushi restaurant,
Yeah.
yes, they have that banner right here.
Right.
You bow so you can walk in.
And I said, you just got an A.
Well, I think we've all had the experience of getting change at the store from the cashier and bowed and realized I didn't just do that.
Yeah. It's just, it's amazing how things that we do for certain situations play out in other areas too. And it's and even in the American culture, if someone says something and you nod your head, in essence, that's a bow. Because you're saying to the other person, you're right, or I agree, or I understand, or whatever, but it's always a positive connotation. And I mean, that's another way of explaining the bow as well to those people that are concerned about subservience. You simply ask them, if someone agrees with you, do you nod your head up and down? Yeah, it's a stupid analogy, but it works.
To me too, it's like when the bowing is like when the lights turn off at a concert. Like, yes. All right, be quiet and sit down now. It's time for the show to start. Like, we're all done now. Get your chips and your food or whatever. Time to go sit down. The lights are off. Right. It's that same kind of thing. Like, as soon as you bow, I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
Everything else is done. There's no side chat, puts you in that mindset. And then you bow again it's like a bookend. You bow again at the end, and now you can chew bubble gum and talk to your friends again.
Right. Anyway,
Just
Okay.
don't do what I do. If I don't understand something, I'm looking at the person, I smile, I'm not in agree. I don't understand you, but I'm not in agree.
And sometimes we do that. We smile on our head and we say, okay.
Yep.
Anyway, so
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to need to leave here soon. I want to thank you guys for sharing your depth and breadth of knowledge. I always learn a lot, and I take a lot of notes.
okay, and we got to get you in a different environment last time because it still looks like you're lying down.
I'll work on the background. It just occurred to me I probably look like I'm in a padded cell.
Yes. Sometimes I think I need to be there in a padded cell.
Well, let's not go there.
Anyway, I think we're going to end at this point anyway. And if you have, we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 other topics. If any of you have any thoughts on possible future topics, please send them to me because I don't want to come online some Saturday morning and say, okay, what are we going to talk about today? And then we look at each other for 90 minutes. So if you have, anything that's on your mind or something that we talked about today that, kicks off a thought, let me know so that we can, put it out there. Anyway.
I do believe we skipped over a topic. I'm looking at the email. Question number 3, coming back after COVID. That can be one that we can go over.
I'm sorry, I forgot that one. I'm going to put that one down. That'll be the first one we do here. I don't know why I skipped that one. Anyway, so yeah, we'll hit that up because that's still a challenge for a lot of senseis and dojo. Anyway, so want you have a great weekend. Now, do we wave goodbye or do we bow out?
Thank you.
Both.
Hi.
Hi. All right.
Bye.
You guys have a good weekend.
Okay, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.
Bye all.